Headquarters 20th Maine Volunteers Field, near Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, July 6, 1863. Lieutenant, in compliance with orders from Brigade Headquarters, I have the honor to submit the following report of the part taken by the 20th Regiment Maine Volunteers in the action of July 2nd and 3rd near Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. On reaching the field at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon on July 2nd, Colonel Vincent, commanding the brigade, placing me on the left of the brigade and consequently on the extreme left of our entire line of battle, instructed me that the enemy were expected shortly to make a desperate attempt to turn our left flank, and that the position assigned to me must be held at every hazard. I established my line on the crest of a small spur of a rocky and wooded hill, and sent out at once a company of skirmishers on my left to guard against surprise on that unprotected flank. These dispositions were scarcely made when the attack commenced, and the right of the regiment found itself at once hotly engaged. Almost at the same moment, from a high rock which gave me a full view of the enemy, I perceived a heavy force in rear of their principal line, moving rapidly but stealthily towards our left, with the intention, as I judged, of gaining our rear unperceived. Without betraying our peril to any but 1 or 2 officers, I had the right wing move by the left flank, taking intervals of a pace or 2, according to the shelter afforded by rocks or trees, extending so as to cover the whole front then engaged, and at the same time move the left wing to the left and rear, making a large angle at the color, which was now brought to the point where our left had first rested. This hazardous maneuver was so admirably executed by my men that our fire was not materially slackened in front, and the enemy gained no advantage there, while the left wing in the meantime had formed a solid and steady line in a direction to meet the expected assault. We were not a moment too soon, for the enemy, having gained their desired point of attack, came to a front and rushed forward with an impetuosity that showed their sanguine expectations. Their astonishment, however, was evident when, emerging from their cover, they met instead of an unsuspecting flank, a firm and ready front. A strong fire opened at once from both sides and with great effect, the enemy still advancing until they came within 10 paces of our line, where our steady and telling volleys brought them to a stand. From that moment began a struggle fierce and bloody beyond any that I have witnessed, and which lasted in all its fury a full hour. The 2 lines met, broke, and mingled in the shock. At times, I saw around me more of the enemy than of my own men. The edge of conflict swayed to and fro, now one and now the other party holding the contested ground. 3 times our line was forced back, but only to rally and repulse the enemy. As often as the enemy's line was broken and routed, a new line was unmasked, which advanced with fresh vigor. Our 60 rounds were rapidly reduced. I sent several messengers to the rear for ammunition and also for reinforcements. In the meantime, we seized the opportunity of a momentary lull to gather ammunition and more serviceable arms from the dead and dying on the field. With these, we met the enemy's last and fiercest assault. Their own rifles and their own bullets were turned against them. In the midst of this struggle, our ammunition utterly failed. The enemy were close upon us with a fresh line, pouring on us a terrible fire. Half the left wing already lay on the field. Although I had brought 2 companies from the right to its support, it was now scarcely more than a skirmish line. The heroic energy of my officers could avail no more. Our gallant line writhed and shrunk before the fire it could not repel. It was too evident that we could maintain the defensive no longer. As a last desperate resort, I ordered a charge. The word "fixed bayonets" flew from man to man. The click of the steel seemed to give new zeal to all. The men dashed forward with a shout. The 2 wings came into one line again, and extending to the left, and at the same time wheeling to the right, the whole regiment described nearly a half circle, the left passing over the space of half a mile, while the right kept within the support of the 83rd Pennsylvania, thus leaving no chance of escape to the enemy except to climb the steep side of the mountain or to pass by the whole front of the 83rd Pennsylvania. The enemy's first line scarcely tried to run. They stood amazed, threw down their loaded arms, and surrendered in whole companies. Those in their rear had more time and gave us more trouble. My skirmishing company threw itself upon the enemy's flank behind a stone wall, and their effective fire added to the enemy's confusion. In this charge, we captured 368 prisoners, many of them officers, and took 300 stand of arms. The prisoners were from 4 different regiments and admitted that they had attacked with a brigade. At this time, Colonel Rice, commanding the brigade, brought up a strong support from General Crawford's command and 3,000 rounds of ammunition. The wounded and the prisoners were now sent to the rear, and our dead gathered and laid side by side. Shortly after, Colonel Rice desired me to advance and take the high steep hill called Wolf Hill, or Round Top, half a mile or more to our left and front, where the enemy had assembled on their repulse, a position which commanded ours in case the assault should be renewed. It was then dusk. The men were worn out, heated, and thirsty almost beyond endurance. Many had sunk down and fallen asleep the instant the halt was ordered. But at the command, they cheerfully formed their line once more, and the little handful of men went up the hill, scarcely expecting ever to return. In order not to disclose our numbers, as I had now but 200 guns, and to avoid bringing on an engagement in which I was sure to be overpowered, I forbade my men to fire and trusted to the bayonet alone. Throwing out 2 small detachments on each flank, we pushed straight up the hill. The darkness favored us, concealing our force and preventing the enemy from getting range so that their volleys went over our heads, while they deemed it prudent to retire before us. Just at the crest, we found more serious difficulty and were obliged to fall back for a short time. We advanced again with new energy, which the knowledge of our isolated and perilous position rendered perhaps desperate, and carried the desired point. We took 25 prisoners in this movement, among them some of the staff of General Laws. From these officers I learned that Hood's whole division was massed but a short distance in front, that he had just prepared to advance and take possession of the heights, and was only waiting to ascertain the number and position of our force. I posted my command among the rocks along the crest in line of battle, and sent 2 companies in charge of judicious officers to reconnoiter the ground in front. They reported a large body of the enemy in a ravine not more than 200 or 300 yards distant. I therefore kept these 2 companies out, with orders to watch the enemy, while our main line, kept on the alert by occasional volleys from below, held its position among the rocks throughout the night. In the meantime, the 83rd Pennsylvania and the 5th and 12th Pennsylvania Reserves came up and formed as a support. The next day at noon, we were relieved by the 1st Brigade. We were engaged with Law's Brigade, Hood's division. The prisoners represented themselves as from the 15th and 47th Alabama and 4th and 5th Texas regiments. The whole number of prisoners taken by us is 393, of arms captured, 300 stand. At least 150 of the enemies killed and wounded were found in front of our first line of battle. We went into the fight with 358 guns. Every pioneer and musician who could carry a musket was armed and engaged. Our loss is 136, 30 killed, 105 wounded, many mortally, and 1 taken prisoner in the night advance. Often as our line was broken and pierced by the enemy, there is not a man to be reported missing. I have to regret the loss of a most gallant young officer, Lieutenant W.L. Kendall, who fell in the charge, also Captain G.W. Billings, mortally wounded early in the action, and Lieutenant A.N. Linscott, mortally wounded on the crest of Wolf Hill. Our advantage was dearly bought with the loss of such admirable officers as these. As for the conduct of my officers and men, I will let the result speak for them. If I were to mention any, I might do injustice by omitting some equally deserving. Our roll of honor is the 380 officers and men who fought at Gettysburg. My thanks are due to the 83rd Pennsylvania, Captain Woodward commanding, for their steady and gallant support, and I would particularly acknowledge the services of Adjutant Gifford of that regiment, who exposed himself to the severest fire to render me aid. Very respectfully, your obedient servant, J.L. Chamberlain, Colonel, 20th Maine Volunteers. Lieutenant George B. Herendeen, Acting Assistant Adjutant General, 3rd Brigade, 1st Division, 8th Corps.